Welcome aboard, all you Dale Raisers. Here it is, a Monday, fresh out of bed. It is January 13th, and it is a continuation of my Thrash January, my tribute to Bay Area Thrash Metal, one of the all-time greatest music scenes, and still, even though Metallica came out of this, and Testament and Exodus, and all kinds of other great bands, still very underrated in my mind. And as I talk to my guest today, I sit down with somebody that was there at the ground zero like myself, Mr. Brian Lew. He is the co-author of an incredible coffee table photo book called Murder in the Front Row. And oh my God, this book is an absolute must-own. Some of the greatest photos from this era ever. A collection of just masterpiece photos. So you know how I love rock and metal and just music photography. This is an incredible combination of not only a great human, Brian Lew, and by the way, also Harold was involved on this. And if you guys have not seen this book or the documentary, you're going to love this episode because we sit down and we get into how this all came about and our love of early thrash metal and how organic it was. We didn't even know what we were seeing. And it's just an amazing story Brian has, because I didn't really know Brian back in the day, and here we were probably at some shows shoulder to shoulder, right next to each other. And that's just that's an amazing story, because you get to hear it from his point of view and mine, of just like, and like he says on this interview, everybody seems to have the same memory of just, it was fun. It was radical. We didn't think it would be around in a few years. We didn't really sit and think about that. We just went out every night, saw live music, and watched things explode in front of our eyes. This is I can't recommend this book enough. I'm telling you, this thing is over the top. I have it now at my house. Thank you, Brian, for bringing it over. And people come over. I've got a lot of books sitting on my coffee table. When they come over, they immediately gravitate towards this one. They're like, what is this? And I think it's, besides that, what was that film Combat put out? Besides that, with Slayer, Exodus, and Venom, that Studio 54 show. Besides that, this is definitely, this is beyond that film. That captured something. I really laugh all the time how there's not a lot of footage from that time, but the footage that is around, the photos and what's in Murder in the Front Row is just mind-boggling. Adam Dubin directed the documentary. It looks like it's going to be out on DVD. Everybody's been asking me, where can I see this? I hear you, man. It took me about a year to see it, and I finally went to go see it with my buddies Billy Rowe and Greg and Heidi, my old landlord, Heavy Metal Heidi. We all went to see it downtown L.A., and I cried a little bit, and that's real. I was just kind of... It was moving to watch this film, and it's moving to look at this book. So yeah, it looks like a DVD release with a ton of extra footage is coming out in the spring. Very, very excited for you guys all to see that, and hopefully Adam will be on the podcast soon. I want to give some big love to everybody that came out to the Bridgeport shows over the weekend in Connecticut. They were all great except for one. One was pretty damn empty, and I just like to put that out there so it doesn't look like, oh yeah, man, I'm just killing it out here, because no, I'm not killing it. I need people to come out. It's a rough ride when I'm out headlining, and I'm always blown away when there's people in the room. I'm just like, oh God, thank God, because I am not the flavor of the week, and I am not the giant comic. I'm out here in a way of a lot of these bands in the Murder in the Front Row book. I've said it over and over. I'm building it one fan at a time, grassroots style. And hopefully I live long enough to see it flourish. I do want to thank the Balkan Brothers Band. These guys, so cool. Just a band that was playing in Bridgeport. Big fans of the podcast and came to see my comedy before their gig that night. I couldn't go to their gig because I had 2 shows in one night. And I was battling. I've been battling this brutal cold. I think it's at the final ends. But how long do these fucking things last now, these colds? I don't know what, what's in our food. There's some kind of shit in our food that too many antibiotics. Hey, too many antibiotics in that motherfucking day shit. You know what I mean? They got antibiotics. Anyway, it was great to see these guys, Balkan Brothers, come to the show. Check out their band. Very cool. They got a new album out called The Sun Studio Sessions. And follow them on Instagram. And Steven, they're a 2-piece band, and one of them makes fucking guitars. He's a luthier, which is pretty damn cool. Thank you, guys. I love you. Check them out, everybody. I want to give a quick shout out to all the new Patreoners. This is so damn cool. The Patreon bonus episodes, I'm up to 60. I just dropped one yesterday. A lot of Neil Peart talk. I like to make sure I pronounce his name right. Over all these years, everybody's pronounced his name wrong or right. But, God, long live this man. Is just brutal. He is gone, 67 years old. And I dig way deep into it in the brand new patreon.com/Dean Del Rey bonus episode, number 60. Join Patreon and hear all the bonus episodes. Long live Neil, man. The guy was an absolute legend. And holy shit, it was weird because I packed my vintage Rush Signals shirt to wear on this trip. I'm out on a 10-day trip, Bridgeport, now in Las Vegas, doing the Comedy Cellar all week. But I packed it. It's one of my favorite shirts. I got it at Wyco Vintage. Those guys are just golden with my vintage tees. But I got it like a year ago. It's one of my favorite shirts. It's the ultimate just graphic. Rush had some of the best artwork ever. And the Signals cover really knocks me out. And then this particular shirt is the perfect thinness and wear. It's just the golden shirt, so I bring it on trips. So I brought it on this one and opened the suitcase, and there it was. And I was like, wow. So I wore it for all the shows. This weekend in Bridgeport, a little tribute to Neil, and God, I'm loving the outpour on the internet. And like, if you heard my episode with Rob last week from Death Angel, I wasn't a big Rush fan when I grew up, and now I'm absolutely into him. My palate just was not fucking ready. My brain, my little fucking dumb rock and roll brain couldn't take in Rush and Grateful Dead and Pink Floyd. I was just out like, I'm gonna rage. But Rush is a massive influence on all these thrash metal bands, which makes it all tie into the January here. Rush is definitely an inspiration for Metallica, the long, weird, proggy music, of course, of Injustice for All, my favorite. That's how I find all these bands. I find them backwards. I love the Mother Hips, and then the Black Crowes started jamming, and I love the Allman Brothers, and boom, I end up at the Grateful Dead, the ground zero of all that. Same thing. I love Metallica. I love Death Angel, Ultraviolence, the weird, long, intricate sections and multi-parts of a song. Like, what the hell? How did they think of that? Well, they thought about it from listening to 2112 and Limelight and Tom Sawyer and all that. So, God, long live the great Neil Peart, and thank you. Okay, Patreon shout-outs. Philip R. Hansen, loving it. Steve Shank. Chris Heron. Paula Cooper. Oh, my God. Another female Del Raiser. I think we're up to 6 now. Thank you, Paula. Misha Feldman. Now, that could be a woman, but it could be someone from Finland. You know? Misha's my name, mate. Ryan A. Pedro. Vote for Pedro. Daniel Chase. Barry. Nick Balcom. James Simon. JJM. Okay. Miguel Alvarez and Zach Wold. These are some brand new Patreoners. Thank you so much. And, man, it means a lot to support this podcast. It's just, I cannot thank you enough. If you're at a show, come meet me. I'll give you some stickers, some guitar picks, whatever I got, man. I'll give you, photos, hang out, shoot the shit, come out to a live stand-up comedy show and see me, Del Raisers. Lots of shows coming up. Tons of headlining dates. Just got a headlining date in San Francisco at the Chapel. That's February 26th. Tickets on sale right now. DeanDelRey.com. I'm headlining in Portsmouth. When is that? Portsmouth. This is going to be great. Let me find this goddamn shit. Oh, before I do Portsmouth. Austin, Texas, March 7th. One night only, Austin. Do it. Portsmouth, March 13th and 14th. That's going to be badass. New Hampshire. Represent. Bridgeport, Connecticut. Thank you for showing up. That was amazing. Okay, also some headlining dates in Tempe, Arizona at the Tempe Improv. And those tickets will be on sale next week, and that's in the end of March. I love all you guys. Let's keep the candles lit. Thank you, Brian Lew, for doing the show. You are a absolute gentleman, and I love your story. Let's get it on right here. Candles lit, Del Raisers. Mr. Brian Lew. All right, welcome to another episode of Let There Be Talk. Another guest from right here in San Francisco. Let's see here. This is a fantastic guest. Introduce yourself.
I'm Brian Lew, co-author of the book Murder in the Front Row. It's basically a photographic yearbook of the early San Francisco Bay Area metal scene. Myself and my co-author Harold Oyman, we just happen to be kids, teenagers back in the early 80s around San Francisco and the Bay Area, and we just happened to be nerds and carried cameras to shows, and we didn't throw anything away, and here we are.
This book, I saw the film a couple months ago. Billy Rowe and I went, and between this book and that film, I was crying at some moments of the film because it was so insane to look at it now and think about what this thing has become compared to back then. And especially at the early stages, like I guess 2 days ago was the anniversary of Cliff's first rehearsal with Metallica, and you were there.
Yeah. I mean, it's a trip. So with the book, the idea for the book came out in 2011 or so, and our publisher Bazillion Points, their idea was brilliant. Like Harold and I agreed, where we wanted it to be a yearbook. So when you look at the book, if you get a copy of the book, it's just like a yearbook. The cover's like that smooth, kind of glossy cover, like a high school yearbook. And when you open it, one of the ideas that Harold had was, on the captions, we tried to identify every single person in every single photo. So, when you look at a high school yearbook,
it's got the things.
Yeah, there's Spanish Club, and there's da 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 da. So, the idea with the book was to do the same exact thing, like give it a vibe of a yearbook, and so people like us who were there, it would be it'll be our little personal yearbook. But then for the vast majority of the people who weren't there and see the book, when you look at an old yearbook, you kind of get an idea of what was going on. Like, oh, this is what was going on at the track meet, or this was what was going on at the Stone or Ruthie's Inn. So that was the vibe that we wanted, where like if you were there, you look at it in a completely personal way, but if you weren't there, you'd still get it. And I think our publisher really nailed it, like really nailed it.
Let's get into a little bit about, I mean, I was around in that scene, of course, from the ground zero, so were you, but you were really, really, really at the beginning. Where were you from, and how did you get into it? Because I know you from the past, but you didn't play in any bands or anything. So how did you get in? Did you grow up in San Francisco?
I grew up south of San Francisco, Sunnyvale, Silicon Valley,
Yep.
like 50 minutes south. So, I was isolated. It was the burbs, and all we had was FM radio. So the stations, KSJO,
KOME,
KME,
Dennis Erectus,
yep, KMEL, like those stations. Like that was my gateway. And then, I think it was KSJO, they had a midnight show and they'd play like local bands. And I have this vivid memory listening to it on my clock radio, and they played Y&T, like Earthshaker album. And like, what is this band? And up until that time, I was like a kid, like the only bands we knew played the Cow Palace or the Coliseum. They're massive, larger than life bands like Van Halen or AC/DC. Right. And then I found this local band called Y&T, and then I found out you could go see them in a club. Like the very first band I ever saw in a club was Y&T at the Keystone Palo Alto. I was like 17, whatever, because they had the 2-drink minimum. So
of course,
so all ages could go in. It was a total scam where you had to buy 2-drink tickets. First band I ever saw in a club was Y&T, and it changed my life because I realized I could go see bands who were as amazing as AC/DC or Van Halen, but they were right in front of me. I could stand outside of the club and meet them, and they were just regular dudes.
Yeah.
And it changed my whole perspective on music. Like so from there, I started just kind of realizing, whoa, there's all these bands who I don't have to, wrestle 14,000 people to go see. And then, one thing led to another, and like at Tower Records, I found copies of imported European magazines like Sounds, New Music Express, Kerrang.
Yeah.
The early 80s English music.
Kerrang was the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, before that for me it was Sounds, and then
right.
But a lot of the dudes who shot photos and who wrote for Sounds went on to form Kerrang. So when Kerrang started, it was like I knew a lot. I was familiar with a lot of writers, so like it had credibility to me already. And so from there, I don't know if you remember in Kerrang, but they had pen pal ads.
Oh yeah,
and like you could write, no matter where you were in the world, you could send Kerrang your little pen pal ad. They limited it to whatever, and they'd print it. So like I sent my thing in, and whatever 3-4 months later, my ad ran in Kerrang, and not even joking, like as soon as it ran, I literally got hundreds of letters from everywhere, Germany, France, England, Canada, East Coast, Midwest. It blew my mind because, again, I was growing up in Sunnyvale. I was isolated. Like I had a couple of friends. I had maybe 1 or 2 friends who were into the same music as me, but I felt isolated. And then,
yeah, even though you're in the Bay Area, it's not. There's no internet or anything.
Right. It was pre-internet.
You're just in your own head in your room listening to music. Like, am I the only guy? And
exactly.
And of course, you'd see the people at the clubs, and and you try to meet people, but it was just like so slow, the process. Yeah. Now you go like, I like metal, and you type it in, and there's a million people.
Right. You're joining a Facebook group. But that's exactly what happened. Like I got all these letters and stuff, and one of the letters I got was from a guy in San Francisco named Ron Quintana.
Oh yeah.
We just started. We traded letters, even though we lived like 50 miles from each other, because
handwritten letters,
even though we were an hour away from each other, because phone calls cost a fortune back then.
Yeah, long distance
phone calls. So we traded tape lists. That's how we got started trading bootleg tapes, and then one thing led to another, and I met Ron, and that was the beginning. I met Ron and some of the San Francisco. There was this whole. I mean, we get into it in the book and the movie, but ground zero for the whole Bay Area thing was this metal scene in the San Francisco high schools. They were into underground metal, like however they found it, whatever.
Yeah.
Ron had, at the time, he had his radio show, Rampage Radio and KUSF. Changed my life meeting meeting the people from San Francisco, because it's like I started coming up to the city like every weekend hanging out, because I these were like-minded. I found my tribe.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that was like, it was really organic. I was talking about it last night of like, the Stone was like a clubhouse. As much as Ruthie's Inn is featured in A Murder in the Front Row, the documentary, the Stone was really the spot of like, wow, because it was so like a pro room and bands were in there and people came from all over to go to that place.
Yeah. And, in the Stone too, the cool thing about the whole Keystone circuit, like if a band came, you could see them 3 times.
Yeah, they play all 3.
Yeah.
So Berkeley, Palo Alto, and San Fran.
Yeah, and it was, like you said, it was kind of like, it was the Mecca almost. But like, everybody played there. Like Motorhead played there 3 times. Saxon played there. Everybody who came through town played there 3 times. So
Slayer.
I mean, the Keystone Palo Alto was my first club, but my first like, oh my God, I'm going to drive to San Francisco to see a show was the Stone when Saxon played there in like March '82. The first time I ever drove to San Francisco. I remember like during the opening bands, just thinking about my car because it was parked like in this bad neighborhood, North Beach.
Yeah.
Just being like, my God, is my car okay? But then like as soon as Saxon came on, I completely forgot about my car. But it was transformative, like coming to the big city and realizing, being intimidated, like, being in the burbs and like you're used to like wide streets and plenty of parking.
This shit was in Broadway at that time was radical. All those strip joints, there was sailors, there was like transients, there was metalheads across the street. You had the Mabuhay full-blown punk rockers, during that kind of GBH era and all that stuff. So that was radical going on over there. And the whole street was electric.
Yeah, and then, but at the same time, maybe because we were kids, I never felt threatened. Like sometimes,
Yeah, I never even thought about that.
Never even thought about crime and to that point, nothing bad ever happened.
Yeah, no.
Nothing bad. So like, those early days, like, I met the whole San Francisco high school scene, and then from there, like, that was the start. I started writing and taking photos for Ron Quintana's fanzine Metal Mania. And
what camera were you using?
Canon AV1, 50 millimeter lens, and like, but I was just doing it for fun. And the same with Harold, we just did it for fun. Like, it wasn't like, oh, we're on assignment and we're going to take photos of these bands. It was like just fun. And then even with Metallica in the beginning, I was just taking pictures of friends because, when I first met Metallica, they just had a demo tape out. So I was just taking pictures of friends. There was no agenda, no career, no nothing. It was just purely for fun. And like, that's kind of the thing we tried to translate in the book and in the movie. Like, we're all kids. Like, even in the dudes in the band, very few of them were 20 years old.
Yeah.
Everybody, like, vast majority of us were like 14, even down to 12 years old. 14 years old up to maybe 20, but the vast majority of us were like 15, 17 years old. Even the dudes in the band, the people doing the fanzines, the people doing the radio shows.
It was all kids. Yeah.
All kids. And I think like that's something that's hard for people these days to get their head around. So like, like Metallica is always kind of like the example because they're the ones who became the rock god, the Led Zeppelin of our generation. But when you think about it, like Cliff Burton, he was gone when he was 24 years old.
Yeah.
24 years old.
24, yeah. Man. You know what's amazing about Cliff and James, though, and I say this all the time to people, now, I think they're only 2 years older than me. I'm 53. I think maybe James is 56 or something. But at the time, they seemed like old dudes. It was really bizarre. Not old, but like older, because they had traveled. Yep. Even if they just toured Europe once, they came back like these guys, and they had sideburns, like, Lemmy had and stuff. So you'd look at them and go like, well, those guys they're like older. And
And then to their credit, I mean, they were looking at things in a different level, even though they're, partying and getting fucked up and doing everything else you do, but they were on a mission. Like, they were on a mission. And
yeah.
I mean, it's hard. I mean, since the book came out, I've done a lot of interviews and talked to people, and I realized like it's hard for people to comprehend because the Bay Area was different, where like a lot of other cities had scenes, but their scenes were built around going to see bands on tour.
Right.
And what was different about the Bay Area was we had our scene, and like, you know, we had our local bands and everything, but like when bands like Slayer and Megadeth and Metallica came here, they didn't have albums out. They weren't on tour. They came up here because they couldn't get shows in LA. So they came up here because they could get shows, and there was a scene here. And so I think, you know, the movie really captures that quickly, you know, just easily digestible, like, you know, 90-minute movie.
Yeah.
Adam Dubin, the director, really was able to kind of distill down that idea. Like, you know, what we had here was something that didn't exist in other cities. Right? Other cities will, you know, of course, other cities had scenes, like New Jersey, New York, Chicago. They all had scenes, but they were more based around bands coming through town. Where San Francisco, we had, you know, we had clubhouses like Ruthie's Inn or the Stone or the Record Vault. Like, there was like an infrastructure here for the scene that I don't think really existed in most other cities.
Well, we also had incredible live bands other than the thrash scene, but we have bands like Le Mans, Roadrunner, Head On. These bands that were selling out 1 or 2 nights at the Stone with no record or anything. And you're going like, wait a minute, these guys just did 1,600 tickets and they don't even have records out. That's how strong of the vibe was for live music in San Fran, you know?
Well, I mean, you know, growing up, I mean, it all goes back to the 60s and Bill Graham.
Yeah.
Like, you know, what the 60s laid as a foundation translated to like the next 40 years where, you know, the Stone was involved with Bill Graham, and like, you know, there were the Wolfgangs as Bill Graham. Like, he, even though he was a concert promoter, but there was a scene here that, you know, didn't really exist. Where like, you know, one of the things I've gotten asked a lot since the book and movie came out is like, you know, why did all this happen here? But you know, it goes back to the hippies, man.
Yeah.
The beat poets in the 50s, where like San Francisco and the Bay Area has always been this place where radical thinking and free thinking has always existed.
Yeah, it's not closed-minded.
Not
It's
at all.
Multicultural. It's and also the way that Bill Graham set up these bills of like Santana and then Zeppelin and Cheech and Chong or something.
Yep.
You know, just these really crazy Miles Davis. You know, Alice Cooper. You're like, what are these bills? And people, he really laid the groundwork of opening your mind to all kinds of music. And if you look at the 2 major bands out of here, Grateful Dead and Metallica, as far as major, completely outside the box, no radio type hits, anything. Mm-hmm. And they're huge right now.
And they both made it on their own terms.
On their own
you know,
terms.
They became stadium bands years into it. Like, and you know, and I mean, it's hard to describe to people who didn't grow up here sometimes, where like, and looking back on it now, it was pretty amazing. You know, like there was so much music here, and you know, not that we took it for granted, but like there were like 4 or 5 major radio stations. There was concerts like all
the time. And this was a major stop for every band. San Francisco, Cow Palace, Oakland Coliseum, Bill Graham, Civic, you know, all of that. San Jose, they stopped there also. They got like 2 stops all the time. So yeah, it's a major mecca for music.
Right. And I mean, I think you touched on it too earlier, where like, I think it was the first interview I did when the book came out. It was a publication in Europe, like Sweden or something. And one of the questions they asked me was, what was it like being an Asian in a heavy metal scene?
Yeah.
And race.
Never saw it.
Never entered anything ever. And like, I'm not even joking, like 30 plus years after the fact, it blew my mind. Like,
yeah.
I never even thought about that. Like,
well, I never even really felt racism until you'd go out of town and some people would be talking and you'd be like, what? What are these guys talking about?
Yeah.
You know, some racist slur or whatever, and you're like, and I talk about that for 8 years on this podcast. That never, for real, ever came around. There was never any of that.
Never. And you know, I think, you know, heavy metal became what it became, and it's perceived as a white boy music genre and all that. But you know, here it wasn't. Like, you know, you have Death Angel or Filipino. There was people like, you know, tons of Asians. You know,
Chuck Billy,
Billy, how many, Stone Vengeance was like a African American band, like
Faith No More.
Faith No More, like, just it was it's the Bay Area scene, as much as one of the things that's kind of always stuck in my whatever was like, the punk scenes everywhere get credit for being diverse, being DIY, being whatever. And like, at least in the Bay Area metal scene was as much as all that as it was, as the punk scene was. Like, the metal scene was here in the beginning was completely DIY, run by kids, fanzines, Ron Quintana, KUSF. It was the same exact plan or whatever that punk bands used.
Same thing.
Exact same thing.
Yeah.
Grassroots, flyering, everything. Bay Area did that. And, as far as my experience, I never once experienced any kind of racism, any kind of anything. It was all, if you were into the music,
that was it.
That was the tribe. The tribe wasn't based on skin color or
no, it was
whatever, or
straight metal.
If you were into the bands, you're part of the tribe. And like, as the scene got bigger, you bring in people from outside of the original area. Of course, things change because as soon as things become more mainstream, you get the more mainstream thinking, and things change. But those early days, like early '80s, the late '80s, it was like pretty amazing when you think about it.
I love the opening picture on this book. It's Day in the Dirt, right? Is this Day in the Dirt?
Day in the Dirt was August 1984, Aquatic Park in Berkeley. And one of the kind of things since the movies come out and all this, or the books come out, we have the book Social Media, and like in that specific picture, Pusshead is in that picture.
Oh, he is? Where is he? Wow.
It's sort of like a Where's Waldo.
Right. Wow, man, Pusshead,
so,
dude.
And then even to this
greatest artist for Metallica and skateboards and everything. Wow.
And the funny thing is, most people still don't know what he looks like. But
yeah, he's like what's that? What's the artist? The secret artist now? The guy that does.
Banksy.
Yeah. He's like the Banksy. The film is pretty amazing, man. Let's talk about it. So the book comes out, and then how long after the book is out do some ideas of doing the film come about?
Well, the way the book came about and the way the movie came about is so organic, and so it basically mirrored everything.
Same as the scene from back in the day.
I mean, it's profound. So like the way the book came out was, real quick, I used to do this blog. I did this blog for like 10 years, just writing just bullshit stuff like random metal memories. Here's some old photos, Ian Christie, who runs Bazillion Points, who ended up publishing Murder in the Front Row and a ton of other amazing music books. He'd been reading my blog. And so fast forward how many years, he came to me and Harold and with the idea of like doing a book, because he was aware of Harold has thousands of old photos. I had all these stories, I had some photos, and he brought up the idea of doing the book. So we did the book. Fast forward to Metallica's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in Cleveland in whenever that was, 2009.
Which you went to.
Yes. And, to their credit, they didn't publicize it or anything, but they literally took the thank you list from Kill 'Em All and contacted me and asked me to help them contact everybody on that list. So basically, they invited us and brought us to Cleveland to be with them.
At like $10,000 a ticket.
Something like that. Like it was amazing. Like, it was like completely under the radar. Like they just wanted to have people who helped them in the beginning there. And so at the after party for that, I met this guy named Adam Dubin, who knew my name because I had written articles for the Metallica fan club. Metallica fan club used to have a magazine called So What. Yeah. I'd written a bunch of stuff for
Stefan Shirazi.
Stefan is the editor. So Adam was there, introduced himself, and so that's where the movie came from. So real quick, Adam's backstory is he went through the exact same thing like us, only in New York with Def Jam and the Beastie Boys. So,
wow.
So his story is his
kind of like Glenn Friedman. He was there shooting that stuff at the Ground Zero, and Adam was there.
Yeah, so Adam's college roommate was Rick Rubin.
Wow.
So Adam co-directed the Fight for Your Right
video
and the No Sleep Till Brooklyn video. And then he went on to work for the video production company. He did videos for, I mean, he and the producer Jack Gulick, who did the movie, they both worked on almost every music video you could think, every metal music video you can think of. They did all the early Pantera videos. They did Trouble, early Danzig, all the way down, like in the late 80s and 90s. So those are the film guys. So Adam, he knew. I got him a copy of the book, and it resonated with him because he went through literally the exact same experience with the Beastie Boys, where they were he met them when they were a punk band still, and then
of course
he ended up co-directing the groundbreaking videos. And so,
did you see the Beasties when we had them at the Stone on that record 2 nights?
I saw one of those shows.
God, that is one of the most insane shows of all time at the Stone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I look at it, it's kind of like Slayer, South of Heaven. That was insane in there. Beasties, Fight for Your Right. Kiss on the Revenge.
Mm.
You know, those kind of shows where you're like, what the fuck? But Beasties in there, man.
Yeah.
Remember they just had the 100 cases of beer and all they would do is shake them up and blast people with them the whole show. That was
like
nuts.
Those are the days, you know. And so, like, you know, that's where Adam came from. And so, fast forward again. So Adam's main go-to thing is he's been Metallica's go-to documentary filmmaker since the Black Album. So, like, he did,
oh shit, he did that.
So he did the year and a half in the life of Metallica.
Oh god.
So he has been their go-to film guy since then. So fast forward to whenever he pitched doing the movie, and not that Metallica was going to be the focus of the movie, because that was the main thing
it's not a Metallica film.
It's not a Metallica film. Metallica are in it, but because of Adam's connection with Metallica, you know, it made it easier. You know, you get Metallica on board, and it's legit. And so, you know.
What I liked about it was it really, really showcased a lot of Exodus, which to me is one of the greatest bands of all time, especially Bonded by Blood. And it really showcased Kirk Hammett as, like, I mean, he taught Gary Holt how to play guitar,
right.
And he was telling all these people about these bands that they didn't know about, and it really showcased him, which I thought was great, you know, because he also, people don't understand, he was in Exodus and then he was in Metallica. He's in the 2 greatest bands out of the Bay Area, you know, as far as thrash metal.
Right. I mean, you know, and that's kind of the thing where, like, you know, if people here know the story, but, you know, Exodus were the heart and soul of that early Bay Area scene. You know, they were here when Metallica moved here. They were here, and, you know, when Metallica, they moved here and they became part of the scene, of course, but then they were off conquering the world, and Exodus were the house band of the scene, like from 83 to
They were in the
85.
trenches.
They were in the trenches, and, you know, Paul Bailoff and all that, like, they were the band. Like,
yeah.
People who weren't here might not understand that, but everybody who was here during that time know. Exodus were the house band, and, you know, we wanted to honor that because, you know, when something like what we had gets bigger, there's always revisionist history, and, you know, people remember things a different way, or people who came later might think it was a certain way, but it wasn't. But Adam really wanted to showcase Exodus because of exactly what you said. Like, Kirk was there in the beginning, like, and he influenced so many people that I don't think he even realized how many people he affected until he saw the movie. Like,
yeah,
you know,
I talked to him about it a couple weeks ago, and I said, man, that was amazing that I had no idea that you taught Gary Holt how to play guitar. And he goes, man, I didn't know they were going to really showcase that part of me on the film, which was really, you know, it was heartfelt. It was cool because a lot of people really look at it as James and Lars, but when you look at that early days, like you said, Metallica was like in Europe, Exodus was just destroying, you know, and they were like, that Bonded by Blood record is just as iconic as Kill 'Em All, you know, if not even better to me, you know.
Agreed. And, you know, and, like, you know, the way things played out with that album, you know, hindsight's 2020. If the album had come out a year earlier when it was supposed to, things could have been different. But, you know, that's the thing with the movie and the book. I mean, it just comes down to, it's meant to be a love letter back to those days. So the book and the movie, like, what it really is when you want to get down to the nitty gritty, it's a love letter basically to our old scene. So, and Adam really wanted to capture the vibe of the Bay Area at that time in the movie. So, rather than focus on the people everyone knows, like all the band people, he wanted to focus on, like, you know, Kirk's contribution to things. And then in the movie, he also features people like Wes Robinson.
That was amazing.
Who ran Ruthie's Inn, which is like the main clubhouse in the East Bay. And then Debbie Obono,
she was amazing.
You know, band manager. And like, so those are people who, if you weren't here, their stories are amazing. So it goes back to kind of like, you know, earlier where I said, like, you know, people asked me what was it like to be an Asian, and it wasn't like that. It was so inclusive. So, you know, like Wes Robinson, who ran Ruthie's Inn, was African American and a total jazz head and like completely not metal, but I
loved his story.
He booked these metal bands because he saw, well, one, you know, he wanted to sell tickets.
Yeah.
But, you know, he booked, like, the first show at Ruthie's Inn was Exodus with a blues band. And, like, I think in the movie they showed the flyer, and Gary's talking about it, like, it was like just like that diverse Bill Graham bill that you just talked about, where, like, Exodus were playing with, like, a blues band and then, like, some, like, jazz fusion band. And then there was Exodus playing, you know, thrash metal with Paul Bailoff.
It's so insane to think about, right? How this little Ruthie's Inn becomes just this full-on kind of the place where you really honed your craft before you came over the bridge to San Fran.
Exactly. Like, you know, so like Death Angel guys, like, they were playing there when they were 12. And like, you know, there was, you know, it was a completely different time, of course. So, but, you know, it was a type of club where, you know, 12-year-olds could show up and get served kamikazes. And like,
Oh, yeah.
And it was
the old days, man. It was like, I remember when I had my 21st birthday at the Stone, the owner, Bobby Corona, pulled me in the office. He's all, hey, you motherfucker, you've been drinking in here for 7 years, and you're now 21? He was furious, actually. He was mad,
but
you know?
It's like different time. I mean, again, it's like, it's hard to explain to people that kind of thing where, like, you know, it was...
Yeah.
If you were there, you were there. There were no, you know, there were rules, of course. You know, if you crossed a line, but the line was like it was so far down the road, like it was hard to cross in a lot of ways. So yeah, like Ruthie's Inn, it was like the gateway club, and then, you know, you aspired to play at the Stone or somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you know, so like Adam really wanted to capture that, and I think he did. And then there's Debbie's story where, you know, she was in her 50s, and she introduced to these bands through her kids, and, like, you know, she ended up managing Possessed and Forbidden and going on the road with them, and, like, you know,
she's like a rock and roll a metal grandmother.
Right. And
here's this white older woman, and she's managing some of the heaviest bands on the planet, you know? I
mean, in a very genuine way. Like, you know, people hearing the story for the first time might think, you know, they'll draw conclusions like what the fuck is going on, but she genuinely wanted to help these kids. Like, it was a very motherly reaction she had to these bands where she wanted to help them. You know, she opened in the movie, it's shown in the movie, her kids are interviewed in the movie. Like,
people sleeping on the couch. I stayed over there a few times. You know, some parties would go on, and you just wake up a couple days later and leave. You know, right. Thank you, Debbie.
But I mean, that's where it goes back to what we were talking about before, where, you know, the Bay Area, it was a scene that had this infrastructure and support system that few other cities had, where it wasn't just clubs booking bands. There was this whole other thing going on where, like, you know, a person like Debbie Obono opens her house to local, you know, kids or traveling bands who didn't have a place to stay or hang out, so they weren't like getting in trouble on the streets. They could do what they wanted to do in her house in a safe environment where they wouldn't get killed or jumped or something. So, like, you know, it's a very unique story. I mean, I have a much greater appreciation now because Adam came in as an outsider, looking at it objectively, but that was the perfect thing about Adam because he came from the same sort of scene growing up in Brooklyn and New York around the Beasties. He saw the same elements that what made it special for him with that scene, what made our scene unique. And so, you know, I've told Adam, you know, we were approached a couple other times from people wanting to do the book into a movie, but Adam, as far as I was concerned, was the only one, just because I knew he cared.
Yeah. And he'd been in a similar situation himself, so he understands grassroots and the insanity of what these things became from so organically grown.
Exactly.
You know, when something's so organic and it gets big, you're just like, oh fuck, some people won. The good guys won.
Right. And and with Adam too, to his credit, I knew it would be like this, but during the whole movie process, so normally you hear the classic story, a book is optioned for a movie and then it becomes something that the authors hate.
Yeah.
That is not the case with Harold and I. Like, to Adam's credit, he involved us in everything from day one. Like day one, when we agreed to do it, we had a big roundtable meeting with him and Jack Gulick, who is the producer, and they basically said, what do you want? What do you guys want in the movie? What do you not want in the movie? And they use that as kind of like their guide to like kind of map out the story. And then that's another thing what Adam did really well is he created a story. It wasn't just like
he did. That's what you got to have. You can't just be like, hey, these guys started bands and then this happened.
Yeah,
you got to have this kind of a thing. And he really did. He showed what stuff like El Cerrito and El Sobrante and the East Bay and that kind of like just poor upbringing and what it was like to and how this music became what it became. You're listening to the new wave of British heavy metal, and then eventually you're listening to punk rock and you're listening to rock and roll, AC/DC and stuff, and then you create something out of your own angst. And it wasn't just like easy or anything.
Right, not manufactured.
Nope.
And the thing I love about how Adam crafted the movie was he didn't use, and this was something we talked about in that first meeting. He doesn't use a talking head, or like some documentaries they have like this authority figure who tells you like this is why this is important and this is why this was important.
Yeah.
Like
that's the story. Tell the story.
And that's what's the great thing about it is, and the film editor told me this during the process where he had never seen this. He's worked on hundreds of documentaries, but he was blown away where like how many people Adam interviewed said the same exact thing about the same said they remembered something the exact same way, because one of the challenges with making a documentary is people's memories are different.
Oh yeah, it's like The Dirt.
Yeah,
like Chris The Dirt.
Yeah.
That's four guys all there, completely different stories.
Yeah. which makes that a great story.
Great.
But so like that's the thing in the movie where Adam touches on something, and like I remembered the same. I remembered one way. Ron Quintana remembered a certain way. Craig Bearhurst remembers the way, and then James Hetfield remembers it the exact same way.
Yeah.
And what Adam really did was like he kind of that's how he creates a narrative instead of having someone on screen like this is why this was important and this is why he was important and this is why that was important. He lets the people who were there tell you.
Yeah.
And so the movie came out in April and it had like about 100 screenings worldwide, like 93 cities. It really, and the way it rolled out was very organic. Again, like, he Adam and Jack, the producer, put it out there and no one picked it up. No one. Like I think people just saw the title Murder.
Yeah.
And they panned it. Like Alamo Drafthouse didn't want it. We had the premiere screening here at the Kabuki Theater, which again was full circle. Because that's where like Metallica played Ride the Lightning Tour, Venom played there, everybody played there. So the fact that it's
Merciful
a movie theater,
Fate, Don't Break the Oath,
everybody played there. So the fact that we had the movie premiere there,
that's so
was
cool,
mind blowing. So anyway, that sold, and then we had a public screening. The first public screening was at the Roxy in San Francisco during San Francisco Indie Doc Fest, and 2 screenings sold out in a day. And the organizer told Adam that it was he'd been putting on film festivals for like 20 years, and he's never had a screening of a documentary sell out in a day. And so once that started, word of mouth started, and long story short, like I think the film was screened in all the Alamo Draft houses in the U.S. and it was screened in Greece, Germany, England. Like again, full circle. Kerrang hosted this Metallica exhibition when they played in London. I can't remember where it was during the summer. And at the House of Anns in London, they had a Metallica exhibition, and they hosted the UK premiere of the movie during that. So again, like everything about the book and the movie has been super organic. We're like down to like the UK premiere was put on by Kerrang, and Kerrang started everything with their pen pal ad. So like,
absolutely, that's so wild, right?
Like the Venn diagram of this whole thing is just mind blowing. So, so like the screenings really took off, really grassroots. Like it's screened in everywhere from Mexico to Sweden to Greece to everywhere. And so, they're planning, working on the DVD and the other kind of channel releases. So that's going to be announced beginning of this coming year. And the DVD and the other channels will be out in the spring.
I can't believe Netflix hasn't grabbed this.
Well,
because
I think it's the sort of thing where, like, again, they don't know what it is. Like
it's such a home run, I mean, they had the Twisted Sister film on there, and this is like way above that. This is like 5, 6, 7 bands. And Twisted Sister, great documentary, but that's just one band. This is a whole thing, and
But I think when certain channels or whatever didn't show interest, I not that I got pissed, but it was just like I realized it's the way it should be.
It's like the old days.
It's exactly how the music was perceived back in the day. It takes the mainstream. The mainstream always follows everything. So.
Yeah.
I mean, it's appropriate. I mean, and that's kind of the way the movies come out. Like, the movie was out and nobody showed interest until one theater took a chance and it went nuts. And then so like, oh, it worked for one person. So, everyone wants, no one wants to be the first one in line.
They just want to make the money once it's
they don't want to take the chance.
Yeah.
And so like, the movies rolled out the exact same way. Like no one understood it. No one wanted to take a chance. South by Southwest passed on it. Like, what the fuck?
What the fuck?
Like they have.
That's insane, right there.
That's fine. That's fine. It's like because it opened up another opportunity that worked probably better because, there's certain, documentaries come out and they play the same festival. And what I like about the way Adam was able to do the movie is very grassroots, like super grassroots. Like once a screening happened, word of mouth, especially with the internet and social media. As soon as the first screenings happened, the social media for the film blew up. Like it's exactly how an underground band.
Yeah.
And like that's kind of the amazing thing how the movies come out, where people treat it like a band. Like when screenings were announced, we were getting messages like, "Are you guys going to sell merch at the screening?"
Merch.
Because we have posters and stuff, and like, and then people are like. And when you looked at the social media comments, like, come to Omaha.
Oh, yeah.
Like play in Cleveland. Like,
I posted
Detroit.
it up, and people were like, where do I see this? How do I see it? I go, I hear you, man. It took me a while to see it.
But it's pretty amazing.
It's a hunger, a thirst, man.
Yeah.
People, that's amazing.
So, yes, it was a bummer in the beginning that some of these mainstream outlets didn't get it. But in a way, it's better this way because it's way more grassroots. And then just hearing reports back from the different cities, like, Adam's gone to a bunch of the screenings and just hearing his reports, like the people's reaction and like people just want to linger after the movie's over and talk.
Oh, that's what we did. It was crazy.
See, that to me is way more important because it just shows like there's still that.
It's that original love.
It can still happen.
Yeah.
Like, it can still happen. Like back in the day, like again, like, I grew up in the burbs and like isolated and then, I found my tribe and it's cool to hear that the same dynamic can happen, like here in 2019, 2020, like there's still that, everyone's jaded and everyone reads the internet and everyone thinks they know everything about everything. And it's cool that something grassroots can still happen again.
Yeah. I think the biggest day in the thrash metal scene, hands down, is when Metallica plays Day on the Green with the Scorpions. That is the day, I call it the changing of the guard. When that day happened and the entire stadium was going crazy for Metallica, I was there, you were there, of course. You look at it and you go, oh, shit's about to change.
Well, I mean, and Adam captures that in the movie. That's like kind of one of the moments in the murder movie where it was like, and it's hard to comprehend where, Metallica were fourth on the bill. They were under Rat and, but it's hard to comprehend. But like, you know, for people like us who were there, it was like we were all playing a day in the green. Like we all grew up going to day in the greens.
Totally.
We waited. We got in line at midnight and, you know, waited in line for 8 hours just to get jammed into the front of the stadium. But like, you know,
Can't wait to see how they painted the stage.
yeah, like the scrims are painted.
Oh.
But you know, it was part of our. It was part of us growing up.
That was the greatest thing about the Bay Area, I think, is the day on the greens, because it was just like, okay, summer's here. We know summer's here. And man, who are we going to get to see? Wow. And then all of our friends are going to be there. Just thousands of people walking around in a stadium like, whoa, dude, what's up? You know, and it was just epic.
And it was unique.
Oh,
like,
God.
You know, it wasn't like a package tour traveling from city to city. Like,
No.
you know, BGP put them on special. So, like, you know, Metallica playing that was like mind-blowing.
Well, to me, it really sat with me like, holy shit, I could be up there one day. That's what it gave me. It gave me they did it. We could do, these are Bay Area guys. These are my neighbors. These guys, I see these guys at night at the club. I see them at shows with me, you know. They were up there. And
Right.
it was insane.
Well, and, you know, but on the flip side, and it's touched on in the movie, where even though this was the Bay Area, there was still very much a Bay Area music establishment. Like Bill Graham presents, that was the establishments. Yes, they brought us a lot of music, but at the same time, they didn't get it.
No.
They didn't get it. And like, I have a vivid memory of Dan Green, where, you know, Metallica played the set, and there was the stage manager who always did the show announcements in between bands.
Yeah.
And I remember him coming to the mic after Metallica played, and he just saying, well, that was interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And then he just dismissive.
Yeah.
Like, completely dismissive. And then,
Yeah.
you know, 5 years later, whatever it was, Metallica were headlining that same
They were
stage.
headlining that fucking place,
Yeah.
man.
So like,
Faith No More, Soundgarden.
Yep. So like, you know, even though it was the Bay Area and open-minded and we had all this music, there was still that.
Well, the old
establishment.
regime didn't
The
really
old
get
re-
it.
the old
And
regime
I
didn't get
would
it.
really like to talk to James or somebody that really, I don't know if Q Prime was with them then, even back then, but I'd really like to know what the back and forth phone calls were like, how that started. Like, hey, Bill, I know you probably don't like these guys. It's not your thing, but you should really put them on this show. And I would like to know if Bill was like, all right, let's do it. Or if he was like, no, not those guys. Or, oh, I don't get it, or what.
To be honest, they probably had no idea who they were, and like,
Yeah.
you know, well, and you know, Q Prime at the time, they were managing AC/DC,
Yeah.
Scorpion.
Fucking,
So
yeah, there it is.
so
there's the
that's the
connection then.
connection.
Scorpions were headlining. They're like, look, we're going to do Scorpions, but
baby
you
band
got to
on.
put our baby band in
Yep.
there. And that, Q Prime could be the greatest management of all time, because you never hear bands going, these fucking guys ripped us off. Nothing. They set those guys up for the greatest career ever, and they still are with them, you know. And all these bands that were working with them still there, you know. So, I mean, I think it's Cliff, and what's the other guy's name? I forget his name, but those guys are genius, man.
well, and they started with Rush back in the 70s.
That's
and, like,
unbelievable.
AC/DC.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so it's like, you know, it's just part of, you know, Metallica are the one band who became that big, but they did it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
And like, you know, people can talk shit about them all they want now.
I never
They-
understood
they-
talking shit about that band.
They still do things their own way.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and that's kind of the funny thing too. Like when you look at the internet, like there's stuff like, well, here's this song if it was played like it was played on and Justice for All. Like, I don't know of any bands who people are obsessed with this revisionist thing. Like, let's add bass to this.
That makes me furious.
But
That makes
I'm
me
more
furious.
I'm more fascinated by it.
I am too.
Because like, what other band has that element in their?
Nobody's going
band?
through and remixing like Dawkins' first records or whatever. Like, here's what it would sound like now or whatever. Yeah, it's like, oh, the Rick Rubin snare is horrible. There's no bass on Justice for All. There's blah, blah, blah. But that also keeps the band in the mix. You know, they always say you got to have 50% hate and 50% love you to be huge.
Right.
And And it keeps the word of mouth going. And to this day, you can pop in right now, anything on Metallica, and 1 million pages would come up of everybody's idea or what it should be or what it was, all that. There's still people that are like, fuck them after Cliff died and all that. I'm like, really? You're going to just throw away Justice and the Black Album just like that? You're out of your fucking mind.
Well, it's like, I think it shows how much people really care, or how much, more like how much that band and that music meant to them at certain points. So like I have this story where like there's this band guy I met through a mutual friend, and he just talks shit about Metallica. Those fuckers, they sold out, da-da-da-da-da. And his band was playing the Fillmore or whatever, and you know, I was there, and James is there. Yeah. And I introduced him to James, and that fucker who like was like weeks before was talking shit about Metallica, like I introduced him to James, and he was like a little kid.
Oh, of course.
And then like after James walked away, he was like, "Oh my God!" Like I did, and like I didn't want to be a dick and say like, "Dude, like, the last time I saw you, you were totally talking shit." And like, but anyway, but it just goes to show like how much like when people strip away their jaded bullshit like 21st century attitude, like, you know, just remember how much something meant to you. Like that's what bums me out the most. Like you might not agree with what's going on now, but come on, dude. Like,
oh well, when we went to the 30-year anniversary shows, I saw you in line with Cindy Poon, and I had no idea what they had planned. But when we went, it was a lot like watching this movie, man. I was getting kind of choked up. And I was looking at it, and I did a podcast the day after that, and that week run there, and I said, it could be, for me, the greatest band ever. For me, and I'm an AC/DC freak and a Zeppelin freak, but there was something so deep in my soul with this band as they did this 30-year anniversary run, and just what these guys do for their fans, like that rollout at the original house, and just the thing they did for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame original people. These guys didn't get famous and go, fuck everyone, and just move away. And you know, these guys were still here, not now, but still here, giving back and showing you they were bringing guys like King Diamond and Rob Halford, everybody that inspired them on stage and giving them full glory. I was like, look, I got goosebumps right now because it was insane to me.
And tickets for those shows are $6.
$6. And it was, oh my God, it was still to this day, you know, I think about like, I wonder if they're going to do a 40. But it's tough. How do you do 40 when 30 was so beautiful?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when the chips are down, like that's one thing I still appreciate about Metallica is like they do things right. Like you know, when it was stuff like that, where you know, 3 years ago when they released the Kill 'Em All box set, you know, they rented out the old Metallica mansion in El Cerrito.
It was insane.
They rented it out.
The old house they lived in.
Yeah, and they had a party. They moved everything else. They brought a stage dresser in to kind of try to recreate the way the house looked.
It was crazy. They had the posters up. Who was living in there? Does somebody own it now?
Well, I guess after that happened, like whoever owned it turned
Airbnb?
it
I knew it.
They tried to do a Metallica-themed Airbnb.
Yeah.
But I don't think that worked out. But there's some kid who's... Well, here's a more full circle thing, because when on the book and movie social media, like Harold went by there or something and saw a for rent sign. Uh-huh. And so we you know, as a joke, like we posted it on the Murder in the Front Row socials, and like some kid like got in there and rented it. And so I think he still might be living there. He was at one of the movie screenings, but...
That's so cool. There's that scene where James you got a picture of the Metallica house. There's a Porsche 914 in the front. I'm a Porsche freak. And James goes, that was definitely not our car. And what's funny is James not like a Porsche guy, or maybe he is, but he's all, that's way too much money. He goes, that's actually a shitty cheap one. But it was a great photo, a Porsche 914 in front of the house. What an insane, to think that they just rehearsed in that back. In that little shack thing, you know, and you got the photo of Cliff Burton in there. When you first saw Cliff when he came in and watched the rehearsal, were you like, wow, this is going to be crazy?
Well, I'd seen Trauma before.
Right.
Like I saw him with his first band. So I already knew who he was. But before I saw Trauma, like a friend of mine said, you got to see this band Trauma. The bass player's insane. And so Trauma opened for Saxon at the Keystone Palo Alto.
Right.
And, Trauma were Trauma, but Cliff, I mean, he looked exactly how he looks when he joined Metallica. But, during the Trauma set, he did a solo with his wah pedal, but he used a beer bottle as a slide. And he was like obviously next level. And so for me personally, Trauma played and I was at the front of the stage and I just have this memory of reaching up as he walked by and shook his hand, and a year later I'm in the living room of the El Cerrito house and he's with Metallica. So it was like that kind of throughout this whole thing, at least for me personally, with the old scene and the book and the movie, there's so many circles.
Yeah.
Like circles. Like the dude I saw in that band a year ago, now he's in this band, and then that band, fast forward 30 years, is like that fucking band in the Hall of Fame. It's like,
oh god, did they call you and say, hey, we got our new bass player coming over today, come over and check it out?
I think that probably because Ron Quintana was there, and Ian Callan was there, so they were doing Metal Mania, the fanzine, and I tagged, I was there to take photos, to kind of cover it. But mainly, there was 5 of us. Mainly it was just Lars inviting friends over just to check it out.
Yeah, and what'd you think?
Well, it was, it's hard. Hindsight's 20/20.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because what's hard for people to comprehend was they weren't Metallica.
Of course,
they didn't have an album out yet. They had
they're playing covers.
They had playing covers. They had one main 9-song demo tape, but they were basically friends of ours who were in a band. They have a new bassist.
Yeah.
They were amazing.
You're just going to a place to drink beer.
Yeah, just hang out. But I mean, they were already one of my favorite bands.
Yeah.
But it was based on a cassette tape. There was no album out. There was nothing. It wasn't like, oh, let's go. Oh my God, we're gonna go hang out with rock stars and see them rehearse. That wasn't even the vibe. It was just well, we can't rehearse in the garage yet, so let's just move everything out of the living room and set up in the living room.
Yeah.
And so that's what it was, and it was just jamming, no vocals, just jamming, and of course it was awesome, but
right.
And Cliff, Cliff was we already knew Cliff as the bassist of Trauma, and he was amazing. But again, it's hard to explain to people it wasn't Metallica. It wasn't.
Of course,
it wasn't Hetfield. It wasn't.
But I'm saying,
Lars,
when people know a band and then a new guy comes in, even early on,
the vibe
you
was,
go whoa, this is definitely going to be better.
Well, the vibe was. They definitely went. It was obvious they were next level because no offense to their first bass player Ron, but it was Metallica in the very very beginning. They were just they were just kids. They were kind of sloppy. They just played fast. It was like watching a car go down a mountain road with no brakes.
James didn't even play guitar.
Right.
Imagine if he would have just been the front man forever, no guitar. He's the greatest, besides Malcolm Young, the greatest rhythm player of all time.
Yep.
And imagine if he didn't even, go, I'm going to play guitar. That would have been crazy.
Crazy. But, before Cliff joined, they were just this careening, you listen to the early live tapes on those first shows, they were just a careening car going down a mountain with no brakes, and it was full on. But then when Cliff joined, even then, he added that bottom end, that anchor.
Yeah.
And then it was obvious even then, he was the most advanced musician
and
in
the depth.
room.
He added some depth in this band, man. He brought so much depth and flavor, and his look was just unbelievable. He just looked like a Fremont biker, bell bottoms.
But that's the thing too, how you were saying, everyone looked older and everything. But in hindsight, he was 20.
I know, it's so crazy.
It's not
man.
He was this elder statesman guy.
No.
He was 20 years old or whatever it was.
Between Cliff, Jim Martin, and James, you're and then you look at Kirk Hammett at the time. He looks like a baby, him and Lars. You look at those 3 guys, you're fuck, where are those guys from?
Well, the whole scene, the beginning of the whole scene, I always think of it as it's Revenge of the Nerds. It's straight up Revenge of the Nerds, because you look at all those bands, like Metallica in the beginning, they're just pimply faced kids.
Oh, yeah.
Super awkward.
Super awkward. I
Like-
remember talking to James, and he was like, "Move on."
Yeah.
Because he was so shy, he didn't know. He go like, "Dude, man, you guys were incredible tonight. Move on." I was like, "What? Like, move on?" I mean, he said that to me. Move on.
Like social skills weren't developed yet. But
Jägermeister was flowing, and insecurities were at the maximum.
Yep.
That's wild, right?
I mean, but here we are.
You have, I don't know what you do now, but I've been talking to you over the years. You make toys also. Do you still work for a company that did that or what? But you did a killer King Diamond doll.
Well, I mean, so work-wise, again, it's full circle shit where, like, I just fell into doing, like, licensing and all this. So I started, like, mid-2000s, I started at Lucasfilm. So I worked at Lucasfilm for, like, through one of the movie cycles. I worked on the merch for Attack of the Clones, like, through that whole cycle, like, just...
Nerd heaven.
Nerd heaven.
Yeah.
Super nerd heaven.
Super nerd heaven.
Worked at Skywalker Ranch, saw like George Lucas like every week, all that.
Wow.
So then from there, I fell into rock merch. So I worked for 3 different merch companies over like 10 years. So again, full circle, because I worked for these companies who were doing the merch for Metallica, Slayer, Iron Maiden, Motorhead, Led Zeppelin. So like that's where I really kind of got.
What's the name of that company?
First company I worked for was Sony Signatures.
I remember them, yeah.
So they ended up being bought by Live Nation. So now they're Live Nation merch. Then I worked for a company called Bravado. And they were basically Iron Maiden's merch company forever and Led Zeppelin's merch company forever. They started in England. They had an office in New York. And they had like a office in Oakland. That's where I worked for. And then when that ended, some of the people who started Bravado started a new company called Global Merch, and they're still around. They still do Iron Maiden, Slayer. They did One Direction. They did, they're major merch companies. So like, I just kind of fell in with these companies, and I was doing third-party licensing for a while. Just kind of, like the Iron Maiden van shoe was like a program I worked on.
Oh wow!
So I worked on that with Vans and the company. So anyway. Fast forward, now I'm with a company called Super 7, and Super 7, they're like a designer toy company. They started off like a Japanese vinyl collector company, but now we do licensed programs. So we did like Masters of the Universe, movie properties and stuff. But now, once I started with them 3 years ago, we've started doing music stuff. So we've done Iron Maiden, we've done one wave of like. So the whole idea of like our main product, it's called Reaction Figures, and they're based on the old Kenner Star Wars action figures.
They're so cool.
So that's what it's based on. It's like what we call them is what if toys.
Yeah.
So like what if Iron Maiden had action figures in 1985? This is what they would be.
Did they do the Jaws ones?
We did.
Yeah, I got those.
Yeah.
Those are amazing.
So
I'm missing one of them though, but wow, I
So
love
those
them.
were the early ones.
Yeah.
Early on, and so like with the music ones, like we did
King
Diamond.
King
we've done
Diamond one's
Maiden,
amazing.
We've done Misfits. We have some other ones coming out next year, but again, it's just the full circle nature of this whole thing. Where
Well, your whole life you've been working in metal, which is fucking beautiful.
But I mean, kind of the cool thing about it is, again, it's all happened organically.
Yeah.
Like it's not like I went to college and I studied and blah 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 blah. Like it's all happened because of connections.
Yeah.
Like everything that's happened has happened because of a connection, which is pretty cool. Like because I'm not religious or anything, but like there is,
There's something spiritual to that, man.
there is
You know?
well with the music and the metal and there's it's a common whatever, but like it's still like kind of affecting shit I do. Even me talking to you right now. Like,
Yeah, look at this, man.
like
Here we are. What is
are.
this? Almost 40 years later, and we're talking about some of the.
It's still, but the thing that I love about the Bay Area and this, it's still relevant. It's not
my God. We're not those people like, those were the days. Right now is the days, too.
Yep, you can
All these
still-
bands are playing. You can go out. You can find your own bands that you like. There's so many new bands that I love right now You can create your own murder in the front row if you just get out of the house and get off the computer.
Yep, exactly. And like, that's kind of the thing too that I think, again, like, some of the mainstream outlets might not appreciate yet. We're like, oh my God, if this was a story about CBGBs or London in 76 or LA in 78, like, we're all over it. But like, Bay Area, San Francisco heavy metal, I don't know. Like,
I still want to do the documentary on Dan DeGreens. That's my dream. If I make a lot of money, that's exactly the first project I'm doing.
But see, that's what I mean. Like, there's like, it's at a point now where, like, at least with music history, if you're not attached to these well-known things, you're not relevant.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Well, it's not CBGBs. It's not.
The Stone is just as big to me as the Whiskey a Go-Go.
Regionally, completely. Like, if as far as like the period of time that what was going on for us, it was just as relevant as Sunset Strip
or
CBGBs or 100 Club.
Ness's story at the Mabuhay Gardens is a full movie. That would be insane.
And they're right across the street. Like that.
Right across the street.
Like,
It's
just amazing.
I want to thank you for doing the show. And I love this book, and I loved the film. It was absolutely mind-boggling to watch this, and thank God you guys had these fucking cameras with you, because there is some photos in here that are just unbelievable, and especially that day in the dirt. It's just to see that, just the metal bands playing in a park during the day, and a spoof on Dan the Green, and see the people that were there. It's wild.
Yeah, a moment in time,
Yeah, yeah. Well, tell everybody your Instagram, because you got an Instagram and everything like that.
Yeah, so the Instagram, follow. It's easy. It's at Murder in the Front Row. We post all the stuff about the books, the movie, everything. We try to add extra content. The movie will be out on DVD on that in the spring, so we'll be rolling all that out. They're working on some pretty cool extras based on there's tons of unused footage. But the way they're creating the extra content, I think, is a really unique thing. So all that will be announced, but it should be pretty cool. Like, so if people have seen the movie already, like, the extras will be like worth it, sort of thing.
Here, I named this last night, and tell me what you think, what yours are. But I think the three greatest thrash metal records out of the Bay Area are Ultraviolence, Bonded by Blood, and Ride the Lightning. I can't include Master of Puppets because, of course, that's a masterpiece and later. But I'm talking early on. Those are my three.
I mean, Bonded by Blood is forever my favorite.
Right.
Mainly because it's a product of the scene.
Yeah.
Because Exodus was writing that album when they were playing Ruthie's Inn, when they were playing all this and all that. Like, it's the one record that's a product of the scene where, like, Ride the Lightning, Metallica were here, and, like, it's definitely one of my top 3 favorite albums, but they were already on their way. Of course. They wrote some of it on the road. They were like, but as far as, like, 101% pure, like, East Bay, San Francisco, like, Bonded by Blood is the one.
I called it the greatest record ever made out here, Bonded by Blood, for years and years and years. But I go back and forth because I'll put on like Ride the Lightning. And I'll be like, oh man, I don't know. This thing has so much crazy depth. Yeah.
It's hard for me to like pick
of course,
specific albums. But like, but if I was to pick one album, I mean, Bonded by Blood is the one, like, just personally.
Thanks for doing the show, man. Yeah, man. I really appreciate it. And, hope you get out and see some comedy soon.
Yep.
And I'm sure I'll see you at another Metallica event, Hopefully it's a 40-year somewhere, something. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Get this book, man, and see the film and get the DVD when it comes out. And do not sleep on this, please. It is an absolute piece of metal history. And Murder in the Front Row. Check it out. Thank you, guys. See ya. Candles lit.